they counted 13 opportunities for Smith to de-escalate.
What's that old saying, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail?
The presumption of innocence, the benefit of the doubt, all of that stuff just evaporates in the jury's mind when they see somebody that is characterized as having a predisposition.
This is the In Self-Defense Podcast with Don West, Steve Moses, and Shawn Vincent, exploring high-profile self-defense cases and identifying the lessons learned for concealed carriers. Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Vincent. Thanks for joining the podcast today. Today I'm going to take you to Lapeer, Michigan, where not long ago an armed defender was found guilty of murder for defending himself against a crowbar-wielding assailant. And at first blush, it's difficult to understand how somebody who's being attacked by a crowbar could be convicted of murder, but as this story unfolds, it will become clear this armed defender made about every mistake we have in the book. He returned to the confrontation after he had a chance to leave. There's evidence that he was actually the first aggressor, that he pulled the gun before this man attacked him with the crowbar. And he had social media posts that telegraphed that he was concerned, if not interested, in having confrontations at gas stations, which is where this incident occurred. It's also going to bring up an interesting topic about how you never know what mindset that a potential attacker or an aggressor may be in. This guy happened to be about 2 times the legal limit to drive. He was also high on cocaine. And when this armed defender pulled a gun on him, bystanders say that he said, "Go ahead and do it. I've got nothing to lose." It was a recipe for disaster. It caused this guy to be convicted in less than 2 hours. There are actually a lot of great lessons for armed defenders and concealed carriers in this case. So we're going to get to it. I'm joined today, as always, by Don West. He's a criminal defense attorney and national trial counsel for CCW Safe, and our friend Steve Moses. He is a well-respected firearms and self-defense instructor. As always, this is not legal advice. This is not even specific tactical advice. What we do on this program is that we look at high-profile self-defense cases and we offer an informed discussion and analysis of those cases. This is designed to help you know what your options are and make smarter self-defense choices. Of course, every self-defense case is unique. You're responsible for your own decisions. We hope that we can give you something that's going to help you make better choices based on other people's mistakes. Here's my conversation with Don and Steve about the Lapeer gas station shooting.
Right, so we're in this gas station in Lapeer, Michigan. This is how I see it from the news reports that I've read. Smith leaving the gas station, Cohn's coming in. I'll add that Cohn's got a 0.14 blood alcohol level and on cocaine, so maybe not the best driver at this moment. Smith doesn't know this. He just encounters this guy kind of coming into the gas station in a way that makes it hard for him to get out. He goes out, goes to another parking lot, turns around and comes back to the gas station. This is the Clark gas station, I think. Cohn sees that he's coming back. Smith pulls in. Cohn pulls his vehicle up next to it. What is obvious is that Cohn, there's some words exchanged, a lot of F-bombs, according to a witness who saw it and heard it. They're really at it. It's a road rage incident. Cohn gets out of his car with a crowbar, opens up the passenger door to Smith's car, and he's going to attack him with a crowbar. Smith fires 2 shots. One hits this guy in the arm, the other hits him in the chest. Smith drives off to an adjacent parking spot and waits for law enforcement to come. Cohn kind of wanders around a little bit with a crowbar until he wanders to another parking spot and collapses and ends up dying. At trial, we hear some argument that Smith may have raised his Smith & Wesson .38 pistol at Cohn before Cohn attacked him. Am I missing anything, Don?
From the factual sequence as I saw it, I wasn't clear whether Cohn had actually opened the door or was going to try to open the
Attempting to
door
open the
or had the
door,
crowbar
sure.
for that purpose. But what really surprised me about it was, if you fast forward to the trial, was that it didn't take the jury very long to decide that Smith was guilty of murder. And
I think
that,
less than two
yeah,
hours.
that surprised me a little bit when you.
Because here we have a case where a guy is
Mhm.
attacked by a crowbar wielding assailant. He fires to defend himself. No doubt, I think that a crowbar could be a deadly weapon, especially if someone has the intent to use it.
Sure.
Yeah, and then he's convicted in 2 hours. It takes a lot to get over that to get a conviction, I think, right?
Yeah, when you figure the prosecutor's obligation is to disprove self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. So the jury would have had to have concluded that Smith's use of force, even in that context of being apparently attacked by someone willing to engage, had a crowbar, they'd been
Yeah.
arguing and fighting, and the guy had gotten out of his car to come to Smith, apparently. Notwithstanding all of that, Smith's conduct in using his weapon was unreasonable, maybe disproportional, and certainly unreasonable, and convicted him.
Well, one thing that the prosecutor said in their closing arguments was that they counted 13 opportunities for Smith to de escalate, and he didn't take them, and he was in control for the entire time. And I'm thinking, Steve, when you look at that whole sequence of events from driving away actually and coming back, how do you read all of that?
Well, I kind of fall back on the thing where we said, if it's not safe to go and do something without a gun, it's not safe to go and do something with a gun. In many instances, people feel like, okay, well, I'm always going to be in a position that I can stay here and defend myself. If I have to, I will use my gun. And then when they actually have to, or they do indeed use it, they're somewhat surprised that the events kind of unfolded that way. So I think he was asking for it. I think he probably, when Cohn got out of the car with the crowbar, as far as I know, his car was not stuck in that position. He probably could
Mm,
have driven off. Then the question becomes, if that's the case, why didn't he? And again, what was that old saying? If the only tool in your toolbox is a
Mm-hmm.
hammer, then everything looks like a nail. Well, I think he thought the correct tool for that position, for that situation, which turns out it was not.
well, let me reinforce that because a detail we haven't talked about yet, and this was controversial. At first, it was going to be kept out of the trial, and they took this detail up to the appellate court. The appellate court said that some of this we encounter all the time, social media or digital messaging evidence was relevant. And so he had taken a picture of this 38 caliber Smith and Wesson pistol, sent it to a friend of his, and he said a good pocket gun for gas stations. And it turns out he used it for a confrontation at a gas station. And Don, you
Mm-hmm.
saw the prosecutor argued to the jury that he had basically had an intention that he was going to start a fight and shoot somebody at a gas station.
Yeah, it's so easy for a prosecutor to make so much out of that. The presumption of innocence, the benefit of the doubt, all of that stuff just evaporates in the jury's mind when they see somebody that is characterized as having a predisposition. And then all of a sudden it becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy. This is reminiscent of Daniel Perry in Austin with the BLM protest, when it was learned
Yeah.
later on that he had some stuff on social media that came back to haunt him, and probably from the jury's perspective eliminated all doubt they may have had about what his intentions were. And my suspicion is this is exactly like that too, Shawn. And then you've got a guy who had opportunities to leave, to de-escalate. He had an opportunity, if nothing else, to roll the window up and lock the door and make this guy smash the window and pry open the door to get at him because he was sitting there with a gun. And
Sure.
instead, he shot him through the window, open window, apparently, a couple of times.
Steve, something that you and I have talked about before, we may have brought this up on the podcast before. Like, so he may not, that text that he had this pocket gun for gas stations, that might not be proof positive that he intended to go to this gas station and pick a fight and murder a guy, right? But it put him into a mindset where he's thinking about having arguments and confrontations at gas stations.
Mm.
And then when one unfolds, he had this mindset already, and he had a hammer and he was looking for nails, and he fell into this pattern. The mindset took over.
Right. And the main reason it unfolded is because he made it happen. He
Oh,
left
yeah.
the
Yeah,
gas
he left, he
station.
drove
Isn't
away,
that correct?
and he came
And then
back.
came back around. Yeah.
And so what we try to do is create the opposite mindset. Instead of saying, "Oh, I've got this gun, so if I get in a fight in a gas station, I can win the fight or whatever." Instead, it's, I've chosen to be a concealed carrier. I know I can protect myself if I have to. Now let's see, what can I do to make sure I don't have to? And if that means I can safely leave the road rage incident or drive away, then that's a better choice. So, and it's a whole other spectrum of solutions, other tools in your toolbox
You know,
besides
I,
shooting
I
people.
see this in my mind a lot of times, and I'm interested in Steve's comments on. We have a lot of road rage type cases that I get involved in, and with CCW Safe members and other kinds of cases that probably could have been avoided at some point in time, but there was some critical moment where a gun came out or shots were fired or what have you. Uh, so I'm wondering that when we get a lot of road rage type cases, and I see otherwise pretty normal people that just lose it, and they sometimes do really ridiculous things for a long, long time before the end, whatever the end turns out to be. Either somebody gets some sense and veers off, or a gun comes out, and God forbid somebody gets shot. But there seems to be, and what you're talking about, Shawn, the avoiding, the driving away, getting out of there, that sometimes there's what comes to my mind as a feet stuck in cement mentality, that the options may be very real and there be a lot of them, but they just aren't considered. If you have a gun, so many people don't just take a step back or turn the wheel.
You say that, and I'm a pretty even keeled guy. I don't get riled up a lot, and I'm on the road, and I'm going to turn left up ahead a little bit, and there's what the cops call a suicide lane. It's when a road has one turn lane in the middle, but there's no lines or medians or barriers, so some people can just get in that line. So I'm trying to turn left, and this other jack off gets into that lane like 300 yards before this turn, and he's just going at like 35 miles an hour, just enough to where I have to like really change speed to get ahead of him or behind him before he's going to turn to the same place I am when I do it legally up ahead there. And there's this the middle-aged dad in me wanted to get out of the car and go and give them a traffic lesson. And then I wasn't really going to do it, but I just thought, oh my God, this is how people get shot or
Mm-hmm.
end up shooting people. I don't care. And then, of course, a minute later, um, they're gone, and I'm thinking about, is there going to be money in the P.O. box when I get there? Steve, would you agree I was almost emotionally hijacked in that moment?
I would
I think
say
it's what Don's
Claude
getting up
Warner would
to.
agree that you were almost emotionally hijacked.
I got fired up just
Yeah, it was coming back to you, wasn't it? I
Yeah.
haven't seen you that animated since you discovered a new bourbon.
yeah, that will do.
And it's especially frustrating now where you've got people that are texting, and going 30 miles an hour under the speed limit on a narrow 2-lane with heavy traffic. There's a lot of that I do find aggravating. And I just remind myself over and over and over that it's not worth it. That if something does happen, if somebody confronts me,
Yeah.
I don't want at any point that a witness could say that I did something that contributed to it, that indicated that I was a willing participant. And so I just try to keep that in mind also.
Yeah, and then we've had this conversation before, so I love these cases that they keep bringing up old lessons that we've learned, but we can never hear them too many times. And we'll go back to what I said at the beginning. It turns out that this guy had a 0.14 alcohol level, which is almost double the legal limit to drive, and he had cocaine in his system. And I think we often, when we engage with somebody, have the assumption that they are of sound mind and rational and intelligent, just like ourselves. And sometimes they're morons who are super drunk and charged up on cocaine, and they're not going to respond to us the way that we think that they should. Or sometimes they're injured, sometimes they're mentally incapacitated somehow. But to assume that the person's in the same mindset as us, we've seen that cause countless tragedies.
Yeah, that there's boundaries that all respect, right? You know, you won't go beyond a certain point, and you assume the other person won't either. And then pretty soon as one person crosses that line, it's completely off the rails.
Well, another
And
thing,
Steve, there's
go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, and another thing is there are just so many people out there that are walking around just quietly seething. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they hate their job, they hate their family, they hate their spouse, they've lost their job. They can find all sorts of reasons that they are just having a bad day. They're having a bad day every day. And then it's almost like just kind of like a sore scab on your skin, and somebody
Yeah,
inadvertently flicks it and it causes them pain, and then they react to it. And when you
yeah.
think
Some
about
some guy knocks up on the window and wants to talk to them about abusing the suicide lane, and it triggers them,
just they're
right?
they're already mad, and all they
Yeah,
need is just a small trigger on my part to set that off. And I just try to do the very best that I can, not to be that person. And then I keep going back to, I assume that there's a drone over me, there's a video of me all the time. I don't want anybody seeing me do anything that would
Mm.
suggest that you know I'm contributing to this situation, that I
yeah.
wanted a piece of it. And so it's a very it's very, very, how should I say this? I force myself to stay in that mindset, and it's not fun.
But it saves you a whole lot of grief, I imagine.
It has.
Steve, you mentioned something about like drone footage or security camera footage. So there is some evidence, I think, from security cam, which was not HD motion picture grade quality, where the prosecutor was able to suggest that Smith raised his pistol and pointed at Cohn before Cohn attacked him with the crowbar, right? And if that is true, then it was Smith who opened up the threat of deadly force, of physical violence, and it may have been Cohn who was defending himself against Smith. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about, if you point a gun at someone and do not fire it, you cannot predict how that person's going to react.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And one of the things I've always cautioned people about is that if you're going to carry a gun and use one to defend yourself, and you cannot do it competently, if you go for your gun on someone that maybe was just going to threaten you for money, or perhaps maybe strike you, something like that, and all of a sudden they see you putting them at threat, they're probably going to defend themselves, and they may be better at violence than you are. So this is all just really important stuff. You can get yourself in a lot.
Don, did you catch the bit where the one witness said that when Smith pointed the gun at him, Cohn said, "Go ahead and do it. I've got nothing to lose."
No,
Yeah,
I didn't. That's the guy
Steve,
that's having the day Steve was talking
yeah,
about, isn't it?
yeah,
Right?
yeah. So Steve, talk about that.
Yeah.
yeah.
You've talked about that some like suicide by cop. Some people, and we had that we talked about the Alexander Weiss case where he got in that altercation after the car accident inside the road, and he pointed the gun at the guy who was threatening to beat him up, and the guy said, "Go ahead and do it,"
And he did it.
and he did it. And so I just think, Steve, when you point a gun at somebody, there's a whole world of things that can go, and I don't think any of them are going to be the reaction that you want it to be, especially if they're drunk and high.
Well, and especially what happens when they say exactly like he did, go ahead and do it, and then they continue, encroaching upon you.
Yeah, you get this dynamic. Andrew Branca, that we all know and care about, talks about this in some of his work. The idea that the situation of self-defense is dynamic, so it can actually change. It can go from one person defending him or herself because of their perception to it shifting to the other person have a legitimate self-defense claim based upon their reasonable assessment of what's going on. And in fact, it's entirely possible where violence ensues, both people could raise a self-defense claim. So slippery stuff, very slippery.
But to get to the idea of first aggressor, if a fight starts because you pulled a gun, when it comes to legally defending yourself for using that gun, you got a whole lot of explaining to do, and that might contribute to why this jury took less than 2 hours to convict this guy.
And the other stuff too that usually comes into it, maybe he wasn't a very likable guy. Maybe he just gave the jury a bad vibe, and maybe when they saw
they
that,
didn't like his text messages,
they saw that social media stuff,
posts,
and that confirmed their suspicions. This guy is not deserving of a break, because in a case like that, it's an all or nothing thing, right? Self-defense is all or nothing. That's why the stakes are so high, because to get into a self-defense case, you have admitted you're the one who did it. You're the one who used the violence. And then you have to have some sort of plausible reason why. Now, of course, the legal standard doesn't require you to prove it, but don't fool yourself for a second. If the jury doesn't think it was self-defense in a fairly strong, compelling way, they're not going to go your way. Just not going to.
I'm assuming that Smith was not very competent with that handgun. And one of the things is that when people are not well trained, they tend to get a handgun into the situation much sooner than it was probably necessary. So the more training that you have, and if you know how to handle that, that handgun, you're probably going to be in a position that you can wait much longer until the threat is literally looming there in order to bring that handgun into play. And when you do, if you do it properly, you may be able to do it in such a way that we would call you're justifiably using defensive display. So, I mean, that's the only thing I might say, but basically, it looked to me that, Smith made his bed there and now he's going to lie in it.
Yeah, we don't give legal advice. That's not what we're doing here. We're drawing practical lessons from real life self defense cases, right? But if we have a list of lessons that we've learned, and we do, they're showing those on CCW Safe right now. I talked about like 45 of them on little 1 minute clips. This guy broke at least half of them. He did everything wrong he could have, and that's why he got a 2 hour conviction.
Okay, everybody, that's the podcast for today. I appreciate you joining us and listening through to the end. We'll be back soon with more stories. The next one is about self-defense against animals. It's something we've not talked about before, but something that comes up frequently. Until then, as always, be smart, stay safe, take care.
You were almost emotionally carjacked.